No role plays, no conference calls, no BS. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader. This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Hey everyone, this is Chris.
And Lorenzo.
And welcome to our Best of Saturday series. Now that we have hundreds of episodes, we get a lot of listeners asking us where to start.
So we'll be selecting some of our most popular episodes to share each Saturday from our years of podcasting. We hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, I want to talk about something that is a little bit more ethereal. And that's this idea of, learning to be a better leader. How do we learn to be better leaders? I know that, during the initial pandemic shutdown, you and I and a lot of other people we know, we took whatever, time we had of not being in offices. Part of that time was spent trying to learn new skills, develop ourselves in some way. And I know we talked a lot on this show about learning to be a better leader. And one of the things that we can, both agree on as becoming just paramount in effective and good leadership that really definitely wasn't necessary, 50 years ago and really has ramped up over the last, 5-10 years is this idea of being an empathetic leader, being a person who has empathy for their people. And this idea of learning to be a better leader combined with, we need to be more empathetic has kind of made me think, can you learn to be empathetic?
No, it's a great question. I think, and it's something that we should definitely talk about because I think, I've seen similarly, like there's been a lot of information and a lot of, I think now a lot more learning materials posted online as people were taking the time during the initial pandemic to self-reflect and for people to pick up hobbies, to learn different things, to kind of invest in themselves. I think a lot of different companies, organizations, and places started to put out more and more kind of content in the learning space, which I think is a good thing overall. But I think that there are things that, in my opinion, that you can't just learn by reading something. You can't just learn by watching a video or a TED Talk. You can't just learn from taking some type of a survey to self-assess. Like there are things that really require a good amount of either effort or experience to take on and to learn. And I think that for me, empathy is one of those things.
Yeah, I'm hearkening back to more than 15 years ago when leading a team of people and a team where the culture was really, really significant and really great, and putting on these events that just kind of inspired masses of people, and then having leaders in other parts of the organization come up to us and say, hey, can you come and do this for us? Can you come and put this kind of thing on for us? And me just thinking to myself that you've already lost, man. Like you're not, you need to put this on for you. This is, we didn't put this on in order to create culture. This was created by the culture. And I think about it the exact same way. Empathy is one of those things where I feel like it's something that you have to grow within yourself. And it's really hard to do that if you are, well, first of all, it's impossible to do it if you're alone, right? Like if you lived on an island by yourself, it's not needed. Who do you need to be empathetic to, right? So it stands to reason that if you're around nobody and you don't have to have any empathy, the more people you are around, the more empathy you should have, because the more people you'll encounter, the more experiences you'll encounter, and the more you will either win or lose participating in that society. If you have more empathy, the more people you're around. So yeah, I agree. The more experience you have and the more you can put yourself in those different experiences, I think it's more likely that you'll have empathy, or you'll be very quickly, kind of shunned out of those environments until you realize that why you were shunned out of them is that you were lacking in empathy and you couldn't fit in.
Well, what's interesting is as you were kind of walking through that, I was thinking about times and maybe leaders where maybe you do, because of life experience, have a good amount of empathy. But then when you go to work and maybe you are surrounded by other leaders or peers that aren't as empathetic or don't show empathy, how quickly you can kind of program your brain into saying, well, this is a space where I actually should have less empathy, or I don't apply it the same way that I do in my real life. Like I think people actually have a lot of that battle, because I've seen that. I've seen people that I know and that I've worked with that I would say is like they're an empathetic person. They've been through a lot. The conversations that we've had, what I've observed, like I totally see that. But then I see them work on other teams or other places over time, and then I don't see those same things as to who they are show up in the workspace. And I think I attribute that to probably being around leaders that don't show that or don't think it's a good thing or whatever the reasons are. So I completely agree that I think it's an internal thing to become more empathetic, but I also think it's one of the things that we're up against now that we talk about a lot on the show, which is this new expectation of leadership, and how people really expect there to be more empathy. And so you're seeing more and more of it, where there was definitely a time when, you and I both know leaders that were not empathetic at all. And I think that when they have a place of authority or power, they can tend to make people or influence people to kind of follow those same pathways.
There's something I want to kind of dig into a little bit here because the things that you just said. I'm a little triggered by one thing, and I want to kind of hash this out a little bit. It's hard for me to say that anybody is an empathetic person unless they are almost crippled by their empathy. To me, people I know who are empaths are the ones who have too much empathy. They're the ones who will sacrifice themselves. They put the other person's oxygen mask on before themselves so much that they have nothing left for themselves. I don't know that that's necessarily a healthy thing. So when I hear an empathetic person, my knee jerk is to think that that's a negative thing. The positive aspect of that of having empathy, I think it's how many different types of people do you have empathy for? We keep politics out of the show here, but there's some really great examples in politics of where you can see this happening. Look at former Vice President Dick Cheney, publicly for years and years against gay marriage. Daughter comes out as gay, and now all of a sudden he's supportive of gay marriage. You can chalk that up to nothing other than I now know what it feels like to truly love and care about a person who is experiencing something that up until this point was so far removed from my life that I didn't even have to think about it, and now I have empathy for it. And that is at the visceral level what happened in that situation. If you're talking about a leader who you see as a normally empathetic person who is not when they're at work, to me, I think one of two things. Either they are not an empathetic person and they are trying to be when they're not at work, or they are an empathetic person when they're in their personal life and they're having to kind of like dial it back intentionally when they're at work to the point where they're actually not who they really are. They're somebody different than who they really are when they're at work because they think for some reason that's what they need to be in the moment. And so I don't see that as being something where there's an inherent, like you just kind of turn it on and turn it off. Either you are fighting it back one way or you're fighting it forward the other.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Like I said, I agree that that's probably the internal struggle. But I also agree that you judge a book by its cover, or you judge a person by their behavior, right? And so you could tell me all day long that you're empathetic, but if I don't see that in your behavior, then it is what it is, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I agree with you, and I think that is what a lot of people have experienced over time in certain situations. So it's kind of like you can't. Like I agree with you. Like I don't think you can learn to be empathetic via content. You can learn to be empathetic, or you become more empathetic via experiences, via relationships, interactions, things that happen to you in life, changes of perspective, seeing the world, having children. Like I'll never forget, and I use this term all the time now, sweat equity. I never had heard the term sweat equity until I went to Guatemala.
Yeah.
And then I saw a nonprofit and how they said that, for us, when we're looking to build kind of these cement shacks, is what I would call them, as homes for people, a big part of allowing them to do that was that the families and the parents had to put in sweat equity. They literally had to go and help do things because they had no money to do this. They had no means of anything. The only thing they had was their hands, their hard work, and their sweat on doing things, and put in enough time to then earn the ability for this nonprofit to help them with the home that they were building for them. And so that stuck with me a lot, but that was through experience, that was through perspective, that really helped me to tie together some things in my own head, where that's where I believe, from a leadership standpoint, that, people will say, well, you own your own development and the leader's there to help guide you and things like that. And I see it as you have to put in the sweat equity. You have to put in the time and effort, not just to say that you own your own development, but you actually have to do something to develop yourself in many different ways. And I feel the same way kind of with like this empathy thing, is that you will gain it. I believe most people will gain it over time as they experience life, so long as they surround themselves with people different than themselves. They challenge themselves to do things that they might not normally do. And sometimes life is just going to make you more empathetic because they're just going to throw challenges at you in all different types of spaces and ways. So I think that it really is truly taken in by experience. But I think that you can learn to your point, turn it down, not because you want to, but because you might feel like you have to in certain situations if people see that as a sign of weakness or whatever the reason they want to see it that way. But I think that that's kind of where I see it.
Yeah, it's interesting that a person would think empathy may be a sign of weakness. And the only thing that I can there's like a famous like a movie trope or movie quote of it's like don't mistake my kindness for weakness, right? Mm-hmm. And if a person believes that empathy is synonymous for you can walk all over me, then I don't think they know what empathy is.
Right.
That's not empathy to me. Empathy isn't you get to do what you want and I feel for whatever your situation is, so therefore you get to do whatever you want. That's not what empathy is. Empathy is about being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes for how they got to a situation to begin with, so that you're not reacting with your own projection of how you would have done it versus what happened to them, because everybody brings their own baggage to every situation. So that's what empathy is. It doesn't mean that you skirt the rules. Empathy means that, if a person is having a hard time coming to work on time, that you work with them and talk with them about what's causing the issues and not just assume that they're lazy. That's what empathy is. It doesn't mean that now the rules don't apply to them. At the end of the day, if they are late too many times, there is a disciplinary process and you go through it, because if you don't, then you're holding people to different standards, and that's not fair to the other people that they work alongside. It's how do you get from step 1 to step 2 that requires the empathy, and it requires being able to take yourself outside of yourself and put yourself in the shoes of this person for a moment. If it allows them to walk all over you, that's not empathy. That's just ineffective leadership. And it could be rooted in empathy to start. But again, that's when I see empathy as being crippling, as if you have so much empathy for a person that you allow the situation to progress in a way that it shouldn't, or that is not good for either person.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that, because I think it's always like with all things in life, like there's a kind of a spectrum or bandwidth, or, I guess more spectrum is the word, around empathy and like how much, and then to your point, like when do you apply it, how often do you apply it, what limit do you apply it with? So for you to hear somebody being empathetic and then immediately thinking that it's an application of like over applying empathy,
right,
versus just somebody being empathetic, like that I think that's through experience, right? That's through what you've seen in people, how it's been defined to you, where you've probably hit frustration points or hurdles with somebody who then not only does that, but then says, "Well, it's just because I'm empathetic, Chris." It's like that's what good people do, and like you hear that, and you're like, "Stop!"
That's
right?
a cop out. Yeah,
right? It's a cop out, right?
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Which is why
I have a hard time being empathetic for people.
Exactly. I love it. It's true. But I think it's like when we talked about like the developer's dark side, which is always like one of the first series that I point people to that I love, is just like the realization that that the overuse of certain things can be just as dangerous as the underuse or not having the skill. In a lot of different things, and I think empathy is one of those things, because it can freeze a leader into doing nothing, or to your point, what you just said, being overly empathetic can quite often lead to then a difference of how you treat your people and the difference of expectation that you have for people, and that's not fair to the collective. So there's a balance there. So like in your example of kind of an attendance thing, the first thing you should do is, if you see a little bit of a pattern, is talk to the person. Hey, is everything going on? Is everything all right? I've noticed this pattern. This is outside of your normal scope of what you normally do attendance-wise. Is anything going on that you'd like for me to know? Or is there any support that you need? so that this doesn't continue. And like that to me is being empathetic. And then if the person says, well, this is what's going on, or, this won't happen again, or this is the situation that I'm dealing with, and then you say, okay, is there something we can do to help you with that? And then you help them with that. But if it's the same offer that you'd give to any one of your people, then that's perfectly fine.
Right.
It's when you say, like, well, you know what? Like, let me just go ahead and, like, don't worry about it. Try your best to be here. And if you're late, no big deal. I'll give you a couple of weeks to figure it out. And then what the rest of the team sees as somebody who continues to be late, not be held accountable. And then you're saying, like, well, they have things going on and I can't really share. Like, that's where you start to really cause issues and problems from a larger team collectively. Have you ever seen in your career where the overuse of empathy maybe led to a good outcome?
I look back at when we first did our Clifton Strengths Finder through Gallup years ago. I've said on this podcast before, famously, that empathy was number 34 out of 34 for me, and in the context of this conversation, that makes sense. When I did that, I was 22 years old. I had lived I wasn't a parent. I wasn't married. I wasn't even in a long-term relationship. I was focused on myself. I was in my final year of college, and I was working full time, and I had my close circle of friends, and that's all I had time for. So I really wasn't surrounding myself with as many people as I could and as many experiences as I could. I was kind of like single-minded focus on me. It was about me and taking care of myself. And so it makes perfect sense in hindsight that that's why I would have a very low amount of empathy for others, because I was just focused on me. It takes being in situations where you are not the center of attention to start to develop that empathy. It takes being in a relationship with a significant other where you have to put their needs in front of your own sometimes. It takes being a parent. It takes being in a family where you have family members who are struggling with things that you don't struggle with, and you love them anyway. There are things you have to go through in life that will develop this in you if you allow it to, but it is almost impossible to develop it without those experiences. And some people are more fortunate than others in terms of that the experiences, just kind of get, foisted upon them. Other people have to kind of seek it out. And, there's a quote that I like about being able to travel the world as much as you can. I know it's, some people can afford to do that, some people can't. But I have friends that are kind of digital nomads, and they make very little money, but they still manage to travel all over the place in hostels and shacks and wherever they can. And they do it very inexpensively. And they are some of the most empathetic people I know. They've been to 70 different countries, and they talk about how much the exposure to people all over the world who live differently and who have different amounts of wealth and who have different amounts of education, all those things have impacted them and their ability to be empathetic. And it's a very natural empathy. They don't get walked on at all, but they have this, they carry with them almost this humility and this respect for humanity as a whole that kind of says we're all in this together and we'll all get through this together. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to lay down and let you walk on me. It means I'm going to walk with you hand in hand. I'm going to help you along with me. I think it's a really healthy way to do it. And they did it by traveling. Hopefully other people can do it through other things as they experience more through life.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 minute hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
All right, for this episode's 1 minute hack, here's what I want you to do. First of all, I know it's kind of ironic here. There is no 1 minute hack when it comes to empathy. It's impossible to be more empathetic in a minute, or to do something in a minute that will make you more empathetic. This is a long-term thing. But get out your pen and paper anyway. And I want you to write down a line that's kind of like this spectrum. And I want you to write on one end of the line, not enough empathy. And on the other end, I want you to write too much empathy. And I want you to think about the situations, the interactions you've had with your people over the last 30, 60, 90 days. And I want you to think about whether or not you believe that in those interactions you had not enough empathy or too much empathy. And first of all, if it went well, it was probably okay. If it didn't go well, it didn't get the outcome you were looking for, it means that you were falling on one end of the spectrum or the other, either not enough or too much. So think about those interactions, and if a lot of them are falling on those outside ends of having not enough empathy or too much empathy, depending on who the person is, then chances are you need more experience. You need to surround yourself with more people to help you kind of fine tune that and get more in the middle. If you're having interactions with people that are going well, meaning you can't think of many that fall on the outside ends of that spectrum, then chances are you probably have the right amount. But I'll tell you, my 20 years of leadership experience, I will say it is very, very difficult to find the right amount and to be in that middle, to have the amount of empathy that says to a person, I know what it's like to be in your situation, without also allowing them to kind of take advantage of you as a leader and to walk all over you. Very difficult to do that. So, give us some feedback, give us some DMs, let us know how this went for you, because this is going to be an interesting one, and I would love to know how it went for some of our listeners.
Yeah, no, I think it's great, and really to your point, like this should be the 10-year hack.
Yeah.
It's like take the time to just experience life and see how that impacts your empathy over time. But it's a good practice, and it's something that, from a self-reflection standpoint, we should do from time to time until we feel good about the balance that we're at. And again, the goal here is not to be exactly 50-50. The goal here is to just know how do you apply one way or the other. Because sometimes you're going to have a little bit more empathy based on a certain situation. And then sometimes you use enough empathy. You need to be a little bit less empathetic when repeated behavior is happening over and over and over again, and you've done your due diligence to help support that person. That's a lesson that I had to learn over time in my leadership. So no, I think it's a great great topic today, and looking forward to hear what everybody has to say.
Yeah, totally. And the last thing I'll say on this is, if you're seeing things online, skill builders, learnings, things that say learn how, take this quiz and do these things, learn to be more empathetic. Take a lot of those with a grain of salt. Maybe the quizzes or the tests to see how empathetic you are, those might be accurate. But anything that claims to be able to teach you to be more empathetic by taking this course or watching this video, chances are that's not what empathy really is. And they're really just teaching you how to kind of like fake it till you make it.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.